Sustainability is meeting the needs of today without compromising the demands or needs of the future.
Hello and welcome to Love as a Business Strategy, a podcast that brings humanity to the workplace. We're here to talk about business, but we want to tackle topics that most business leaders shy away from. We believe that humanity and love should be at the center of every successful business. Hello, I'm your host, Jeff Ma, and as always, I'm here to have conversations and hear stories from real people, real businesses, real life. And I'm joined today by a face that probably hasn't been here and a voice that hasn't been here in some time, but always a pleasure to have with me here. Chris Petrie, Vice President here at Softway Culture Plus. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. All is good in the hood, as they say.
And Chris, I know you and I are both very excited because our guest today is Dieter Schultz. And Dieter is an environmental strategy and business planning advisor for Entergy with a career that spans across oil and gas, environmental solutions, and many others. But we've invited Dieter here today to actually speak to us about not only his work, his career, and all these pet things, but also his passion around coaching, relationship building, learning through people, strategy, technical aspects. I mean, all the things. We're very, very excited to pick Dieter's brain today. So I'd like to welcome to the show, Dieter Schultz. How are you doing?
Good. Thank you for the introduction, Jeff.
Yeah.
It's great to be here. Really excited to be here.
Awesome. And I'm going to have you kick us off, Dieter. I want to know, first and foremost, what is your passion and what brings you to that? And what part of your life or what kind of story kind of brought you to that passion?
Yeah, but for me, relationships are fundamental to all of the work that I want to pursue. I think team building is foundational in the relationships that you have with people. And to me, that drives me. How can I work together with people to solve really challenging problems together? And I interweave the relationship, the teamwork together because I love learning what other people can teach me and vice versa as we work through that space. That doesn't say it doesn't come with adversity, doesn't neglect that there can be some really challenging conversations that you have to work through, styles, preferences. But I think that all builds the team and that some of that shared adversity really gets you to a better solution. And that is my passion, is working in that space.
Awesome.
Yeah, awesome.
And to kind of set the framework here, because I know today I really wanted to have a conversation around sustainability, but I guess to set the stage for that, two things, and I guess maybe two completely different questions, but I'll pose them both. You could take them in any order, but we're talking about love as a sustainability strategy. So I need to know, Dieter, what does love mean to you in any context like that? And what is sustainability? Because these are both broad words that can mean many different things. So before we depart, can you please set the stage for us in that front?
Yeah, I appreciate both of those questions. And I'm not sure that it matters in what order. So I'm going to take love first, just because I think my answer is a little bit more succinct, and then it'll open the platform to talk about sustainability. So for me, if I really have to narrow down love, it's a passion that perseveres. And I really hone in on perseverance because your passion is going to be challenged. You're going to work through adversity, but you continually persevere. And to me, that is something that I love. If I can continually be challenged, that means I love that. And it doesn't necessarily matter the domain, whether it's a relationship with someone that's you're working through, or if it's a hobby or a sport or your career. If you really love that, you're going to persevere. And I know there's a lot that you can unpack on other other words that really resonate with the word love, and I have many others, but if I want to keep it short, perseverance, passion that perseveres. That's what love means to me.
I love that.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, sustainability then.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I need 3 words for sustainability. Let's keep it going. No, I was kidding.
well, if you want to talk 3 words in terms
No, I
of
was kidding.
sustainability, we can just be really simple and say, what are the three disciplines that people use to try to assess sustainability? And that's environmental, social, and financial. But what I want to actually go to is more of a definition of sustainability, opposed to how we might try to evaluate sustainability. I want to talk about the definition. And to me, the definition that, dating myself back to college, that really resonated with me is sustainability is meeting the needs of today without compromising the demands or needs of the future. You're probably going to hear me say that definition many times through this podcast, because I'm going to interweave some of my thoughts back into that definition. But it's meeting the needs of today without compromising the demands of the future. And so what that is not, that means we're not indebting the future. And I didn't provide a domain to sustainability. Jeff, you hit on it earlier. It's broad. What is the definition of sustainability? Sustainable relationships, a sustainable environment, a sustainable culture. You want to go over in the business world, sustainable business, sustainable finance, sustainable investing. You hear the term sustainability thrown out, but I want to always come back to that definition of meeting the needs of today without compromising the demands of the future. And so that means you have to give some perspective to time. You have to give perspective to time, and that's relative, because 100 years, 50 years, 20 years, tomorrow, today, you start looking through that and you go, the pace at which I want to move might be faster and different than the pace you want to move. So how do we as a society continue to understand what sustainability is? And so I think that part, and I ask myself that question, is really, really important, because I think society is on this pursuit for understanding sustainability. We're trying to understand that. We're on this quest for knowledge. It's a pursuit for wisdom. How do we understand what sustainability is? And that's what makes it so challenging, is that it is broad, that it is rather philosophical, at least in my opinion. And then you're constantly dealing with competing priorities.
Yeah. That makes sense. And when we've had conversations with those who are like in the sustainability function inside of a business, we hear all the stories. We hear some crazy stories. We hear interesting stories. And one common thread is the intersection between sustainability and behavior, and how oftentimes it's not just a sustainability conversation, but it's a behavior conversation that has to sort of precede the sort of kinematics or the details and sort of business plans around sustainability. So I'm curious if you find that to be true as well, or if you see a different sort of initial rub or friction when it comes to introducing a sustainability conversation inside of the workplace or even in your personal life.
Chris, first off, I love this question. Because if you were to ask me where do we land the plane in this conversation, where do we go from the kind of the technical and philosophical thought of sustainability? How is it applied to science and in the business world? I think one of the most important aspects is now you get into the leadership component of sustainability. And if you want to go back to that definition of today and tomorrow, who's going to help us get there? And it's the leaders that we have in our society, whether that is leadership in academics, your teachers at school, in the workplace, government officials, the leadership aspect. And I'm actually trying to set aside the opinions of what those leaders have, but actually now focus on the behaviors of what they have. Because what sustainability is not, is it's not intended to create conflict. It might create challenging conversations because people have different criteria that is more important to them. Your trade-offs, there's this trade-off battle that you're working through. But sustainability isn't trying to create conflict. It is trying to create collaboration.
Mhm.
And that to me fundamentally comes back to the leadership behaviors that we have and that we choose to exhibit.
Mhm.
And that actually might become more important on how we understand sustainability, how we pursue this quest for knowledge, and better understand the philosophy, opposed to some of the science part. That's 100% me not saying that the science isn't important. It's just recognizing also how important leadership is in this space. So I really love that question.
Dieter, can you give some maybe just examples of leadership behaviors that maybe on both sides, like maybe ones that do successfully help meet the needs of today without compromising the demands of the future, and also behaviors that make that harder or worse?
Mhm.
Mhm.
I'm actually going to reference your book here a little bit because
By all means, please.
Yes.
while we're here, might as well talk about it.
Yeah.
And first off, vulnerability is really important because I actually heard this just the other day, coincidentally, before being able to talk to you about this. But within the context of leadership vulnerability is for the sake of others. So if you're a leader and you're not willing to be vulnerable, what are you teaching the people that you're working with right now? What are you teaching them? You're not teaching them how to solve a problem. You're kind of covering it up. You're not now being inclusive to what they may say because you're not willing to be vulnerable. And if you're not vulnerable for the sake of others, how can you actually understand how to meet the demands of the future? Because you're actually hiding what or putting a facade up to what you're trying to manage today. And so that level of vulnerability is really important. I think that builds personal growth, some reflection that you have as a leader to understand, wow, how can I learn from that? How can I collaborate in that space? Those are actions. Now, those are physical actions. How do I engage in that space? What's my attitude? What's my mindset? So important. So important. So it fundamentally, the example I'm trying to provide roots back in vulnerability. But I think that vulnerability then kind of has some arms and legs that work over into some other spaces.
Awesome. And on the opposite side of that, what can leaders sort of do to diminish sustainability efforts and conversations?
A lack of transparency, which may be the ultimate, kind of the opposite of vulnerability. If you're willing to be vulnerable, you're willing to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. But if you're not willing to be transparent, why?
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Actually, last night I went to see a sneak preview of the new Transformers movie, and beforehand they have sort of the cast sort of talking about stuff. And the guy who voices Optimus Prime said that when he was about to go audition for the role, he told his brother who was in the military that, hey, I'm about to go play a robot. This is like before Transformers was a thing, right? And so his brother who was in the military said, oh, so if you're going to be a leader, be strong enough to be gentle. And he said he took that into the voice recording for Optimus Prime. So when you listen to Optimus Prime, you hear this sort of strong, deep voice, but you also hear this warmth and this care that he infuses into every line that he says because of that sort of command from his military brother. But as you were talking about being vulnerable and also, being transparent, that's a gentleness that many leaders unfortunately don't nurse or understand how to build inside of their communication and their relationship building with their teams. And it's so true that, if you really want to think about sustainability in that context that you gave, how do you get your teams to then live that out? Because as a leader, you're just one person serving a team who's carrying out so many things away from you. And so if you're not modeling and demonstrating those two key things, vulnerability and transparency, you're probably not being gentle. And therefore, there probably is a limited impact you're going to have for that sort of generational lookout from the decisions that you make today.
Yeah, and I love that, Chris, because when we start talking about sustainability and making generational impact, how do we look forward into meeting the demands of the future?
Mhm.
And when you start looking at different generations in the workplace, today's leaders picked up knowledge from yesterday.
Yeah.
They learned from yesterday.
Mhm.
And that's going to continue forward. So how do you continue to understand that and share? Look at the steps we've made. The steps we've made may not always have been right. Some of them may have been really choppy. Some of them may have put us in situations that, wow, pain plus reflection equals progress. So that was tough. That was tough. Let me share a little of my wisdom with you as a leader, but at the same time, don't let my wisdom or attempt at being wise not shed light to what you have to offer, what perspective you have to offer. And I think that is where I want to where I focus on that vulnerability gap, the communication, making sure you're able to work through that space.
Awesome.
So in an attempt to kind of connect this full circle, right? I think earlier you said love for you is a passion that perseveres.
Mm-hmm.
So now that we kind of have under our belt what sustainability is and kind of what it's meant to look like in terms of behavior, can you connect the final dots here on, like, when we talk about a passion that perseveres, what kind of passion, what is it persevering through? Like, what does love and that definition look like as a leadership behavior, how it connects?
Yeah. So I'm not going to use an example about me. I'm going to actually use an example that I think is easier for people to understand because I can illustrate it better. If I had more time to prepare, I can tell you, you'd probably get an answer from me, but it's hard to probably land that succinctly right now. But I'm going to use a sports example. Love sports, grew up playing soccer, played in college, competitive by nature. And when you see a professional athlete win a championship and they've been a professional for just say 10, 15 years, they're veteran, they have experience, and they win, and they're emotional on the court or on the field, you resonate with that emotion. Like, I might not understand what your adversity was, but I certainly am resonating that you're passionate about what you just accomplished. In the road and the journey that you had, I don't know it, but I can feel it. So I can feel that you are passionate about getting to where you are right now, because I can see it and I can feel it, even though I don't know it. And that, to me, kind of lands back in the passion that persevered, because there was injuries, there was blood, sweat, and tears. There was some really difficult, maybe trades. You bounced around from teams, coaching changed, you got benched. There were things that you had to prove, you had to re-identify yourself. And here you are, emotional, crying, holding up this trophy with your team, and everyone is resonating with that success.
How, as leaders, do we find or harness that in order to achieve what we're talking about? If we want to be achieve conversations around sustainability, if we want to actually be able to lead in that way that helps move us in that direction, as a leader, how do you coach them through that?
I think there's two parts to that, Jeff. I think there's the personal passion. I don't know how much a leader can create someone else's passion. They might be able to cultivate the passion that they have, but I don't think you can go and create someone else's passion for them. And so if you are going to say, this person is passionate about this and I know they're passionate about it, how do I unlock that? How do I help cultivate that passion with someone who is? You have to want to work with them. You have to want to listen to them. You have to have good communication. You really have to dig in. You have to lean into what what motivates them. And that's going to take listening. That's going to take caring. That's going to have to take understanding. And if you can't get to that level, that personal connection, that relationship with that person, I don't know how you can coach them. And I'm going to underline coaching in the aspect of leadership, but how are you going to coach them if you can't actually communicate with their passion?
Yeah.
I think that was a really hard question, by the way.
Jeff goes hard. I guess I'm curious to know, Dieter, when it comes to sort of what we've been talking about between sort of marrying the passion, marrying sustainability, but also the right leadership behaviors. Have you seen a success in terms of a business impact or business outcome when you see those things come together nicely? Just so our audience can understand, like, what, when you have all these pieces in place, what can be sort of a tangible business impact or business outcome that perhaps was even surprising to see. It wasn't even the direct or the intentional outcome that we were planning for.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at kind of the underdog mindset, just what is a company or a business or a sports team that just proved you wrong, that you completely didn't think was capable of accomplishing that? And what did they do? How did they do it? What allowed someone that didn't look as good on paper to win?
Mm-hmm.
And my answer is broad, because I don't know if I have like the best case study just off the top of my head, and I don't want that to undermine my answer, but at the exact same time, what is that differentiating behavior that allowed someone or a team or a business to just outperform their competition? How did they do it? And everyone's sitting around going, wow. And to me, that's on the behavior side. That all comes back to the culture, the team building, the relationship aspects. It's some of that intangibleness.
Yeah. As you've been talking and answering that question, there actually is a case study that I just thought of. It's I saw a movie. It was a documentary about this company called Interface, and they make carpet tiles. And so the movie is called Beyond Zero. But the CEO, unfortunately, who has passed away, but his legacy continues inside of the organization. He, in the late 90s, realized how much damage they were doing to the environment. And he stood up in front of the company, one big sort of annual meeting that they had, and said, we are going to get to zero carbon emissions and zero footprint on this planet from our organization by 2020, or some year that he named in the 2020s. And he started the organization on this journey, and nobody understood it. Everybody thought that he had lost his mind, that he had become this tree hugger, like just crazy stuff. And he didn't give up. He didn't stop. He didn't sort of pivot back to business as usual. He actually got everybody connected, because in the next annual meeting, what they did was they planned this major offsite at this resort in Hawaii that wasted water and food like nobody's business. And his team, he hired sort of this eco team that went in and consulted with the hotel and the resort and showed everybody what the footprint was of their experience every single day, and reported numbers and data, and told them what this meant in terms of who was going, like, the amount of food that we wasted could have fed this many people yesterday. Let's try and get that down today. And every day, everybody got involved in reducing the numbers, from the amount of towels that were being washed every day, the amount of food that was being served, the amount of water that got consumed. All of that was being tracked and measured throughout this annual convention. And it was after that where he got on the stage and sort of told the stories of all the things that could have been done with the money or the resources that were used. And he had people on his team crying and sort of realizing how wasteful the organization had been just in that 1 week. And then after that, people sprung into action, and they were able to get beyond zero. So right now they're operating a factory mindset that, factory as a forest. So their factories should be putting more energy back onto the earth, just like it's a forest.
Wow.
And so, cool story. It just came to mind while you were talking, and I was like, oh, there is that cool company that did that. But they're headquartered in Atlanta. But yeah, they have a documentary about that story, and it's like a great story. because it all came back to the behaviors and getting everybody bought in around the same mindset, the same outcomes, but intentionally collaborating, trying new ideas, because they had to re-engineer their products. They had to re-engineer their factories. They had to like re-engineer everything to get to this outcome and this mission that their CEO just woke up one day literally and decided he wanted to do. Yeah.
That is fascinating. And what comes to my mind is transitioning a little bit from sustainability and over to the broader ESG, your environmental social governance, and how are we measuring our impact? How are we measuring and disclosing our impact? And you see the targets that are being set by companies across the entire globe. And there's a variety of frameworks that are out there in different disclosures that companies choose to make. And there's more policy being developed. There's, I'm going to say, market pressure to be transparent and make your disclosures. Well, in order to do that, you have to be measuring something. You have to actionably be able to measure in order to make improvement. And what I think is really important there is, sure, there are several different frameworks. Whether one is better than the other or the others, I think, is somewhat irrelevant, opposed to the bigger picture of that can't create conflict. The idea is to collaborate, and how do we understand what we can measure, how we can measure it, and companies can continue to perform better. In order to know how to perform better, the leaders need to be driving the right behaviors. And then at the same time, you're going to learn from one another on what we can measure. And as more companies begin to disclose information and to give the good intent, some might not be able to disclose yet because they don't have the capability of measuring. And so the world is on that pursuit still. That kind of goes way back to the beginning to what I was saying here. We're still on that pursuit. You can't disclose what you don't measure. And so people are still trying to understand what to measure. And that's helping shape what some of these disclosure frameworks are. And that, I think it's so important that at that part, at the policy level, at the framework level, at the principle level, that doesn't start becoming a conflict. That is really important, that there's collaboration, because that collaboration is going to transcend into how individual companies behave.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, Chris, that was me trying to answer your question, not as specifically as you may have asked. And I know I keep trying to take it into a little bit higher level, but that's just because of the philosophical approach that I'm trying to take in sustainability.
Yeah. No, I completely get it. And I'd say like every organization's sort of sustainability conversation looks different. Every leader that I've talked to inside of sustainability is just depending on the industry, depending on the success markers, depending on the future as well as the past. Like it's different. It's hard to take one company or one group's or one industry sustainability goals and sort of approach and take it and sort of copy paste it elsewhere. It just doesn't fit.
Well, what I find interesting, Chris, is that like even though every industry and business and CEO's idea of sustainability is different, I feel like there's an element of the type of team that is sustainable that is always the same. You know, we talk a lot about resilience and a sense of belonging and these types of things. And when you see those in teams, like the team itself is sustainable because that culture can persevere with a passion, right? Be through adversity, through pandemics, through ups and downs. Absolutely. And that is the type of team you need to then tackle, you know, the more specific, sustainable, financial, environmental, social things that you want to get done. And I think, and Dieter, I guess the question here is like, is that, do you agree with that? But also more importantly, kind of like, if so, like how do you foster that, or how do you get people to see that that's the first step, right? Because there's a lot of targets out there that are like, we just have to hit this level of environmental, but are they looking first at the team's sustainability and mindset? And if not, how?
So Jeff, first off, yes, I agree with you, because I think the team part is so important. I think if you create a high performing team, a team built on trust, a team that can become adaptable, they're going to solve problems, and they're going to work through the majority of problems that you toss their way, regardless of what it may be. They're going to be up for the challenge. They're going to work together, and they're going to pull off each other's strengths to figure out how to accomplish that. And so to me, that is really, 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 really important. Where I see people learning to solve those problems comes from, shoot, this is costing a lot of money. The business performance isn't where we want it to be. And I'm going to call this broadly environmental liability, an environmental cost, an operating cost. You start recognizing the bad performance on the balance sheet, and then you go, oh, I want to go solve that problem. I absolutely need to perform better that way. Do you have the high performing team to solve that problem though? Or are you now are you chasing the target before you have the team? That's a really dynamic conversation. That's an interesting one to have, because I would think, and I would put more of my bet on you create the high performing team, they're going to exceed the target. But at the same time, you still need the target to know how to chase that goal, and also how to be accountable as a leader. Because if you don't have any accountability to where you're going, you're not going to get there. So that's also a really important aspect. And we haven't spoken about accountability at all, but you have the governance component. And the governance is accountability. How are we managing our policies? How are we adapting our policies? How are we measuring what we are disclosing? And all of that is an accountability part. So I may have just navigated a little bit from your initial question, but
no,
a high-performing team's going to get you there.
Yeah.
Yes. Couldn't agree more.
I agree too.
And you kind of breached into a new area that I would love to tackle. And so it's almost like I need a part 2 of this conversation. but for now, I think you've already given me and all of us just a lot to think about. I love the way the dots have connected here in this conversation today between love, behaviors, leadership, sustainability, and really business in general. So Dieter, time flies. Thank you so much for your time and your wisdom and your knowledge and your perspective today. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you for letting me join. It was a pleasure. Always great to talk with both of you. Thank you.
Yes. Good to see you again.
Yeah. And to our listeners, thank you so much. Really appreciate your consistent viewership and what is it called? Listenership. We really appreciate it. Check out our book if you haven't. Love as a Business Strategy, still out there. And we really appreciate all the feedback, subscribing, rating, telling a friend. Chris, thank you so much for gracing us with your presence today. It's a rare sighting here on the show.
Stop.
Anyone who's been digging deeper in the archives of Love as a Business Strategy, Chris was a regular face. But he's doing lots of important things nowadays. So
not as important as this podcast, unfortunately. It's just not as important. Yeah.
All right. And with that, thank you again. See everybody next week.